Piece on the sides of it. Let's get there. Get that down maybe. Sit down there, Mackenzie. Now I'll put this on our lap. There's an LCVP, there's an LCVP. See that thing, that's a boat davit, and that's what they would send down chains, and you'd hook them onto the LCVs, and you could pull them up so you could get them back on board ship. And this ship was an old destroyer. It was a destroyer escort type, smaller than a destroyer, but it had 4 of these LCVPs. Our captain was a very unusual guy. He graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis, but this is supposed to be Mount Fuji, which is in Japan, and the land of the rising sun. Have you ever heard of that as referred to Japan? It's sometimes called the land of the rising sun, so he drew this with all the rays. And here we were, and you see that gun is actually shot. There's a bullet there, and there's a Japanese plane, and there's another Japanese plane. There's one that's being shot down. He was very artistic, and he was very ambitious. He thought he was going to be a great hero. He wrote down here, to Ensign Landis Stewart, a friend at the psychological moment and afterwards. A pleasant cruise, I couldn't wish myself more. He wrote his name, Gordon D. Cassan. And the reason he wrote that was because when that ship was commissioned at Orange, Texas, we were there at the commissioning exercises, and his wife was supposed to be there at the commissioning, and she was going to come because it's kind of an important thing when they commission the ship in the Navy. The trouble was that he had been dating another woman, and so he had to have his wife there. So he asked me if I would take this other woman that he was dating and escort her to the commissioning ceremony, which I did, and that's why he said I was a friend at the psychological moment. It's kind of a stupid thing for him to do, but he did. So anyhow, there's that. Okay, I was on board that ship for about 3 years, and we shook down at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Was our shakedown. The ships, when they're commissioned, they always have what they call a shakedown cruise, where they go out and they try everything. They try the guns, and they try the boats, and they try all the davits, and they'll try to make sure everything works. And if something doesn't work, they want it fixed before we have to go into the battle. So at the shakedown, it was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and of course, that was when Fidel Castro he wasn't there even then, but he came later on. But Cuba was very friendly to the United States because a lot of people would go down to Cuba on vacations until Castro took over. So, but that was where we shook down. So I was on that. I was on, first of all, the light cruiser, and then I was on the LCVP, on the APD, Auxiliary Personnel Destroyer, 119, for about 3 years. And about that time, President Harry Truman dropped the atom bomb. In fact, he dropped 2 of them, and Japan gave up. If Truman had not dropped the bomb, I don't think I would be alive today, because they were expecting the people who went ashore on Japan. Japan was a very, what's the word? Not rabid, but very. The people were going to fight from door to door, from street to street, from neighbor to neighbor. It wasn't just a matter of going in and taking it over. It was a matter of actually killing almost everybody, because they were all fanatical about winning. They were fanatical to their emperor of Japan, Hirohito. And they thought that of the people in the United States who had to go ashore on Japan, about 80% of them would be killed. And the boats that went ashore, most of them would not make it back to their ship because the Japanese were bombing them and running them with artillery. So most of them. So I probably would not have made it back to the ship had the war not ended. So Harry Truman, a lot of people made fun of him at that time as he'd been a haberdasher in Kansas City, and they thought that Roosevelt, I don't know why they liked him, but Roosevelt liked him, and so he made him vice president. But I think Harry Truman saved the lives of not only of thousands and thousands of American people, but also of Japanese people, because all those people were going to try to kill us, we were going to have to try to kill them. So it was a matter of who won, and nobody would win on a deal like that if everybody gets killed. And it was better to drop 1 or 2 bombs and kill their determination to win. That completely defeated them. And true, it probably killed, how many? Several thousand, maybe 100,000 people in Japan, because those Japanese cities were crowded. But it was better to kill that than to kill, say, 100,000 people and to kill 5 million people, which we would have had to do had we gone to the fanatical Japanese and gone street to street and door to door trying to overcome. So that was my service in the Navy. I stayed in the Navy then in the Naval Reserve for another 13 years, during which I came back, finished up college at Adrian College. My V-12 program at Kalamazoo had taken me up to the middle of my junior year. And I finished the junior year and took the senior year at Adrian College and applied for medical school in Ann Arbor and was accepted, and so I went to medical school. I went to medical school, started in 1947, finished up in 1951, and the government paid for medical school is a very expensive school, and they said in those days it would have been about $40,000 a year. That would be maybe $100,000 now to go to medical school per year, and a lot of people who are going to medical school go in a deep debt to try to get through school. So I used my government GI Bill of Rights, it was called, which let the government pay for my books and my schooling to go to medical school. And after I left medical school, I went to Henry Ford Hospital as an intern. And that was where an intern as a doctor, I was a fully licensed doctor, but I hadn't had a lot, I had a lot of experience, but a lot of specialized experience. But at Henry Ford Hospital, I set broken bones, and I delivered babies, and I helped with operations, and you were right in the middle of medicine in those days. In medical school, you're studying the books, trying to learn about this stuff, and then in internship, you're actually doing it. So after the year of internship, I decided I wanted to become an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon. And I found out that there was an opening at the University of Iowa, at Iowa City. And so I went out to Iowa and was there for another 3 years. That's where I met Mrs. Stewart, my wife, and we were married there.
Tom McKenzie, why or how you became interested in medicine, how your service in the Navy influenced
in the Navy, on the APD, on that ship there, there were 5 ensigns on board. There were there were some 200 crew members, and I think there were about 15 to 20 officers, and there were 5 ensigns in my rank. And we all lived in called the aft cabin, which was underneath the back part of the ship. And it was there were a lot of better places to live than that, because the ventilation wasn't as good as it should be, and so on. So when I had a chance, during that time, I became friends with a doctor named Henry Hornsberger. Henry Hornsberger was a pretty good guy. He was a GP, and he was on our ship, And I got so out of that posterior aft cabin, I got in. There were two officers in a cabin. He didn't have it. The captain was the only one that had his own cabin, in the executive officer. But I got into his room, called a stateroom. Really wasn't. It was just a little cabin. But I was reading his books, and I was talking with him about medicine. I hadn't decided to go into medicine at that time. And we had what was called sick call every day. At a certain time, there would be sick call, and he would go to his office, and people who didn't feel well would come to, and he would either give them some pills or tell them whatever to do. So, and I became interested in medicine then, during that. And so when I left the Navy, I finished up pre-med at Adrian College, and applied for medical school in Ann Arbor, and that was where I got in. They accepted 130 people in my class in medical school, and there were 2,300 people who applied for medical school. So I was very fortunate. And I had pretty good grades.
Tell Mackenzie about the showers on the ship. I thought that was so interesting about the saltwater and the freshwater showers.
Oh.
And why you take such short showers even to this day.
Fresh water was not real abundant on the ship. The ship had to make their own water. They had big desalinizers, big machines that took salt water. We had plenty of salt water. And they boiled it and condensed the steam and made fresh water out of it. And so in the enlisted men, now the difference between officers and enlisted men are not officers. The enlisted men had showers, and they had a big room with about 15 shower heads and no privacy, and that water was all salt water. It was hot, it was warm, but it was salt water. Then there was one faucet that had fresh water, and after you washed off with the hard water with the salt in it, then you'd go over to the fresh water and just rinse off so that you wouldn't have salt all over you. Rinse the salt off. And we were told to be pretty careful about, the showers were such that I'm not sure exactly what it was I was supposed to tell her about.
Oh, that story. Now the officers got to have freshwater showers?
Yeah, the freshwater, the officers had freshwater showers, but we still were told to take it easy. We're not supposed to waste water. But every time we went on board, they would load up their freshwater tanks with water, because they could only distill, I don't know, a few hundred gallons a day, and gosh, it took a lot of water to run the laundry and all the other things that they had to do on the ship. So having fresh water was a real, and we had an ice cream machine on our ship, and one of the jokes that we sometimes told is, we had a real tough time. So one time the ice cream machine broke down for 4 days, and we didn't have any ice cream. Well, that's kind of a... Now, I've done a lot of talking. I may not have answered all your questions, but probably not any of them, maybe, huh? You've got some more questions?
Yes.
And I'll try to make these shorter answers.
How old were you in 1939?
Well, I was born in 1923, so I was, what, is it 26? Is that right, Beth?
I'm not thinking.
1939.
The year war was declared. The year war was declared on Germany.
Hmm?
How old were you in 1939 when the year war was declared on Germany?
Oh, so you were born in 23, so 39, you would have been 16 years old.
16, yeah. But I didn't join Navy until 1942, so I was a little older by then still. More like 21 or 22, I guess.
What is your most powerful memory about World War II?
Well, I think that the day the war ended, we were in New York, and New York just went crazy. They had parades, and they had confetti coming down from all the streets, and everybody was very happy to end the war. And so that was probably the most important, the one I remember the most. I also remember before the war, I was in V12 program. I was still in school, and I had an older brother who was in the Marine Corps, and he had been, there was a landing on one of the islands called Saipan, and he had been in that landing on Saipan, and he had gotten hit. He was in what was called an amphibious tank, like it was like the LCVPs, except it had tractors on the side, and so they could go right up and get up to the shore, and then we'd have to stop at the shore. He would just go right up on the shore with a little tank. And the Japanese had anticipated that and had put a lot of obstacles on the beaches trying to stop these tanks from coming ashore. They would dig posts down like railroad ties and stick them up in the air and cross them. The idea being to stop you from getting on shore. And every once in a while, one of these tanks would get stuck on one of these obstructions. And my brother was an officer, and he had 30 people on board this tank that he was trying to get them ashore, and they got stuck. And the routine was that they would put the coxswain, the guy who ran the boat, would put the boat in reverse, and the men in the front of the boat would run from one side to the other to rock the boat and to rock it off of the obstruction. See? And my brother had been doing that, but he had to look over the side of it to see where the obstruction was, and he was a machine gun hit him across his middle. And he got his people on shore, and he remembered that, but then he woke up on a hospital ship, and he'd lost a lot of blood. And so he got his people on shore. And the guy who operated on him, turns out he was from Michigan, the doctor, and he was from Coldwater, Michigan. And after the war, I looked him up, and we went over to see him, and he had some memory. He said, I operated on so many people on that ship. He said, but I remember, because he had to take out his spleen, because his spleen was ruptured. And you don't need a spleen, happily, to live. But it was kind of a sad trip over there to see him, because it turned out that he had become an alcoholic. And he was still in practice, but he had a very small practice. His patients were leaving him because he was an alcoholic. But it was kind of interesting to go and see him after the war.
My mom's mom lives in Coldwater, so I know exactly
Okay,
where that is.
sure, okay.
When did you first hear about Hitler?
About
Hitler.
Hitler? Oh, goodness. We heard about him in, 38, 39, when he invaded Poland, I think, wasn't it? And you wanted to get to Yugoslavia. He was taking over all of these smaller. He had what was called what was it when all the bombers came over that bombed the cities before the Hitler troops moved in?
Blitzkrieg? Oh, the Blitz, yeah,
The Blitzkrieg, the Blitzkrieg.
yeah.
The Blitzkrieg.
Yeah, with the stormtroopers.
That's right. And that was when I first heard about him. And then I also heard that he had taken all of the Jews and put them in concentration camps, and then they were beginning to kill all those Jews. In fact, it was so barbaric that after they killed them, they would go through and open their mouths and take out any gold fillings, because the Jews they were well-to-do people, but they would have gold fillings. They would take all the gold fillings out of their teeth
They melt them down.
and make, But that was when I first heard about Hitler. And nobody liked Hitler. Even Eva Braun didn't like him very well. Pete, would you bring in my big thing that I think I left it out in the kitchen there, the big photo album?
Oh no, Pete, it's
Right
in the
here.
living room.
Oh, it's right here. Okay.